Good evening. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. These are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past and present and thank them for their stewardship of this land. Welcome to the fourth in the five-part series, Radical Self-Acceptance as Activism, curated by Olaya Land and presented in partnership with Third Place Books. We're grateful to our author series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, and the Seattle Times for generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I have a couple quick announcements before we get started. We have closed captioning available for tonight's event. You can access the closed captioning by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. After Olaya and Caroline are done chatting, we'll have time for questions from you. You can ask your questions at any time during the program by writing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And after the program, we're interested in hearing from you. We'll post a link to a program survey in the chat, and we would appreciate it if you took a minute after the event to fill that out. We'd love to hear what you think. Now, I'm delighted to introduce tonight's speakers. Olaya Land is the founder and editor of Lioness, an online journal and community promoting connection, confidence, sisterhood, and self-love. She's also the host of the Lioness podcast. Olaya also leads retreats and workshops all over the world that help people feel empowered and connect to their creativity. And I've been a big fan of Olaya's work for years and was so excited when she agreed to be a guest curator for us. And it's been just an amazing series. And I've learned so much from the speakers that she's been in conversation with. And I know tonight will continue that trend. Tonight she will speak with Caroline Dooner. Caroline is a humorist and storyteller who writes about our relationship with food. She spent years as a performer and dieted like it was her job. And she says, because it kind of was. After healing her relationship to food, Caroline's been sharing what she's learned ever since. She excels at explaining why we have such a dysfunctional relationship with food and weight through a combination of storytelling, scientific studies, and humor. Caroline believes wholeheartedly in the healing powers of food and rest. And you can find more at carolinedooner.com. And I'll be popping links throughout the course of the conversation to both Caroline's website and Olaya's website and all sorts of other resources. So please give a virtual hand for Caroline Dooner. But first, let's welcome Olaya Land.
Hello, thank you, Stesha.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth talk in this series on radical self-acceptance as activism. And before I get into conversation with Caroline, I just want to briefly explain the concept behind this series. Well, first of all, I want to rep the library because I gotta say, I think Seattle has one of the best public libraries in the nation. And they were such a lifesaver during the pandemic, but just in general, our library system has such amazing free programming like this. I'm so grateful for the library. I was thrilled when Stesha reached out to me and asked if I would be a community curator and gave me carte blanche to do a talk on whatever I wanted. I was thrilled. So I'm really honored to be here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the concept behind this talk. So the last 18 months, well, going on 20 months, I don't know how many months here, since the pandemic started, has been a lot, has impacted us in many ways. One of the ways is that I think many of us have seen that life is unpredictable and precious, and people are just looking for a change in the way that they live their lives. Also, 2020 revealed some of the deep schisms in our nation and the need to work for greater justice and equality, especially for marginalized folks. And lastly, especially recently, I've been seeing acute levels of burnout like I've never seen in my entire life. Like people are really struggling. So one of the concepts for this talk is to really explore ways that radical self-acceptance can, well, first of all, what can it look like? Because it can take on all different forms. And then also, how can we use radical self-acceptance and meaningful self-care to combat burnout, lead more fulfilling lives, and show up for ourselves, our families, and our communities? So that's part of the idea behind this. And then I was also impacted during the pandemic by the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, specifically her book, Pleasure Activism, just blew my mind. The idea that we could use leaning into pleasure, leaning into self-acceptance as a form of healing, as a form of activism in and of itself. I was also really impacted. I've been impacted by the work of Tricia Hersey and the NAP Ministry, who you should check out if you don't know their work, who writes about rest, specifically napping, as a form of social justice and activism. So that is kind of the concept for the talk. And let's go ahead and get on into it. Caroline, if you want to turn on your camera. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, thank you for taking the time. I am so excited to talk with you. I have been a longtime fan. I discovered your work, I think in 2019 is when your book came out, The Fuck It Diet.
Yeah.
And for people who have not experienced it, this is the book. We're going to be talking a lot about this tonight. And so basically just briefly about my story, because it is similar, I think, to probably so many other people's stories. You know, I started dieting at age 12. So yeah, when I think about it now, I'm just like, what the hell? Yeah, so started dieting at age 12, developed into a full-on like multi-decade eating disorder. Even once it wasn't really an eating disorder, it was still disordered eating for many years. I've tried like every diet under the sun, and I was just hitting a wall where I was like, this is not working. Like something is happening here. Like this shit is not working. And that is when I'd kind of been exploring like around the margins of like, what can we do besides dieting? Had come across intuitive eating and had tried that. And that wasn't really working great for me. And then somehow, I don't remember how, like your book came into my life and I read this, and it absolutely, like no joke, changed my life. Like it was the final push that I needed to really think about the whole diet industrial complex, the science of why it doesn't work, and to make real change and step off the diet treadmill. So first of all, thank you for writing this fantastic book. And then second of all, I would love if you could talk a little bit about your story, because every guest who's come on this talk series, like when people are doing really cool shit, really amazing work, I love to hear like, how did you get here?
Yes, of course. So to take it all the way back to the beginning, I was a child who identified as having a food obsession and food addiction, because it was so clear to me that I was so much more obsessed with food than my friends. They would like have one little snack packet and I would be sitting in their kitchen, like trying to eat all of their snacks because they had the coolest snacks and I had stupid snacks at home and I hated them. And I didn't make the connection then that it was because I felt mentally denied. And so my body, like I just was obsessed with like binging on snacks whenever I could, whenever I got access to snacks that I thought were really cool. So I always had this sense like I'm a food addict. I have this like crazy relationship with food. But as a child, I had thin privilege. I still do, but it was never about weight as a child. It was just this like thing that I noticed about myself compared to other people. And I just thought it was like this little flaw that I had, but it wasn't stressful to me until I hit puberty, started gaining weight as you do, as you're supposed to in puberty. But I also had this food addiction that finally like the culture caught up with me. And I was like, oh, I don't know if it's okay for me to have this obsession with food anymore. So I started the kind of like stress and guilt started to creep in, and I started binging more and more and more. And then I was diagnosed at 14. So I sort of started stressing out about this around 14. That's sort of when it all shifted. I was diagnosed with PCOS, which I don't know. I know that not everyone knows what that is, but it's a hormonal syndrome it's called polycystic ovarian syndrome. And the way that they used to and still do treat it is from a very, very weight centric approach. Mm. One of the symptoms of many people's PCOS is insulin resistance and can be a lot of weight gain. So because of that, and they do this with a lot of health issues, you'll realize, but weight gain being a symptom is kind of ignored, and they try and sort of act like weight gain is the cause, right? So my doctor said to me, a relatively thin, I didn't feel thin because I had gained weight, you know, going through puberty, but a thin 14-year-old, they said, you have PCOS. You should start watching what you eat and exercising. Make sure you do not gain any weight, you know, keep your weight down. And we'll put you on the pill because it also affects your hormones. You know, it's like they don't really understand PCOS. It's something that a lot of people have. They have different expressions of it. They have different causes and different symptoms. It's a hormonal syndrome. It's a inflammation syndrome. It's a insulin resistance syndrome. It basically is like, if you read about it, and I did at 14, I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. Like, this is a horrible, horrible thing that I have to be responsible and I have to start dieting. And so I did. And I immediately started feeling like completely out of control, completely like, I was like, wow, I really am a food addict. Like this is so important to me to try and like lose weight for my health. Cause I started binging and gaining weight and losing weight and gaining weight and losing weight. And, you know, every 6 months I was on a new crash diet. And a lot of it was, low carb. It was like the early 2000s and the Atkins and South Beach. And I was like, honestly, I was religious about it. You know, like it was all I thought about, all I cared about. And also all I thought about was food. And all I did after, you know, it would be months, you know, the first couple diets, I could go 6 months being perfect. And then it got shorter and shorter and shorter. And I was just binging all of the time. I felt so out of control. And I did that for 10 years. I did that from 14 to 24. I was also an actor. I went to school. I went to NYU for musical theater. So not only was I really stressed about my health, but I felt like I had all these eyes on me. I was going, as you know, to study to become the ingenue on Broadway. Like that was my goal. And I had this sweet little voice that I felt like I had to have this tiny little body to match it. So not only was it a health thing, but it was this like, this is my career. This is my passion. This is my destiny. This is my health. It was just so important to me. And I couldn't do it. I kept failing. I kept binging. And I tried intuitive eating as well when I was 18, actually. So like halfway through this 10-year saga of misery and dieting and binging and feeling like a total failure and obsessing over my weight. And I just, within a day, you know, I read it. I was like, this is amazing. Like it was the first time that I'd ever considered that restriction and dieting were having a negative effect on my relationship with food. But it wasn't enough. Like it didn't spell it out enough and didn't really focus enough at the time. The older editions, I believe that the newest edition has added in more health at every size and talk about our relationship with weight. But back then when I read it, you know, in 2005, I just didn't understand that my obsession with weight and my need and desire to micromanage my weight and my thought that I could do that with intuitive eating was going to just turn it into another diet with the rule of make sure you don't eat too much and don't get too full, you know?
So I just want to interrupt you briefly. I'm so glad you called that out because I think like I had the exact same experience of like, I just turned it into another diet because I was so good at dieting.
Yeah.
So I first want to call out that like, I think a lot of people have this experience. So if anybody else has been here, like know that there are ways to do intuitive eating where it doesn't feel like that. But I see a lot of people doing that. Like they take, and it's just like, okay, well, we'll just make this a diet and I'm going to do it, but I'm going to eat intuitively, but the least amount I can possibly eat intuitively. Right.
Exactly. And that's because that's the culture we're coming from. That's all we know.
Yeah.
It takes so much to kind of like almost shock you out of it is diet culture. It is the diet culture that we grew up in where we don't even question the fact that we should always or we think we should always be eating to be as small as we possibly can. And we should always be trying to eat the smallest amount possible. That is, we don't even have to think about it. It's just there, you know? Totally. So without like deeply, deeply questioning it, we're going to be letting that rule us. And it does for so many of us, you know?
Yeah, totally. So what was the turning point for you?
The turning point was I went paleo. This was my last big diet. And it was an attempt to heal my hormones and heal. And I was always trying to like spontaneously, miraculously heal myself from the inside out. Like I was like, I'm going to like perfectly diet and find the perfect diet, do it perfectly. And I'm going to be healed on every level and perfect and beautiful and whatever. And I remember I was listening to so many paleo podcasts because I was like so intense, you know, like I had to be constantly listening to and reading paleo books. And I'll never forget hearing this paleo guru say, you know, well, when you eat really low carb, it actually makes you more insulin resistant because you're not eating any carbs, but that's okay because you're not eating any carbs. And I was like, wait a minute. I have been specifically trying to eat as little carbs as possible to heal my insulin resistance. Like that's what I thought I was doing for 10 years. And so that was like a seed that was planted. And then there was another paleo blogger that I followed who was super low carb for like a year or two. And she lost her period and she wanted to have another child. So she said, you know, this has messed up my hormones and burnt me out. And in order to try and turn back on my hormones, I am going to start eating a lot more carbs and fat and sleeping a lot more and try to gain weight. And I was like, what? Like just the concept that eating more and gaining weight when you're not coming from like, you know, I could think like, okay, if you're super underweight, then like, okay, gaining weight's probably good. But that was never how I never ever thought that I had an issue with restriction because I never looked like I did. You know, I was thin, but I wasn't like, I didn't look like I had an eating disorder. And that's the thing that a lot of people will eventually learn. We never thought we had an eating disorder because we didn't look like it.
Oh my gosh, you have just said so many things right that like we could just unpack all of that and that could take up our whole hour.
I know it could. It really could. It really could.
But just like I just want to
no, you
briefly. Okay. I just want to call out like so many things, how the number of times I have heard people like adolescents going to the doctor for some issue and the advice was to lose weight and just like, no, like absolutely not. And especially at that age, like I've heard so many stories of that being the tipping point into eating disorders, into disordered eating. So first of all, anybody in the medical profession, just how woefully undereducated the medical profession is about eating disorders and weight just blows my mind.
I know.
So that's one thing I want to call out from your story. And then also this emphasis on healing. Like, I feel like our society, like at the moment, I feel like in past decades, it's just been like weight loss. Like you want to be thin because thin is good. So let's get thin.
Right.
Now there's so much emphasis on healing, quote unquote, like heal with a vegan diet, heal with the whatever, juice, fasting, cleansing, paleo, and based on absolutely nothing.
And the irony is people don't realize that restrictive diets like that and the stress that they cause both mentally and within the body, if you're not eating enough food or eating stuff that's hard to digest or whatever, can really negatively affect your health. Oh dear. What was that? Sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah. I heard that there was a big bang. All right. It's going to be okay. Good girl. Good girl. Thank you for protecting the household. You can come back here now and stop barking. Molly, good girl. I literally heard like a big bang. So
is everything okay?
I'm sure it's fine. There's a university like behind my house. So I don't know if they're just, I don't know, blowing things up. I don't know. That was my fear that was going to happen. Oh, she was sleeping so well too.
No worries. She's fine. Yeah. And specifically what you call it about like hormones, I have also been on the paleo diet, and I don't want to turn this into like talking about every single diet on the planet, but nobody told me that like, so I was like fasting, I was intermittent fasting and paleo. My hormones got so jacked, I couldn't sleep. It was like I was on speed, and nobody talks about that. And nobody talks about how most of the studies have been done on men. And nobody talks about how like there are almost no studies done on women my age, like in my 40s, and like how your hormones are changing anyway. And anyway.
No, completely. And part of that is because if you don't eat enough carbs, your body is like literally having you run on stress hormones.
Yeah. And it was like, people talk about it like a great thing. It is not, it's horrible. It was like, I was on speed and not.
No, and it's this like euphoria in the beginning. You're like, oh my God, you know, it helps you like stick to the diet, but then eventually you're like, you can't sleep and everything starts falling apart.
Yes. So this is like, we already started to get into it, but like, let's just get straight into it. Why you write a lot in the book about why diets don't work. And I know that's a very extensive topic, but like, can you give us like a high level?
Like, I'm going to distill it down.
Yeah.
So the most basic reason is that we are hormonally wired, metabolically wired, and then it affects our hormones, our hunger hormones, our everything, satiation hormones. We are metabolically wired to become obsessed with food and to binge eat when we are restricted. So what that originally was in our earlier days, it was a famine. It was when we didn't have access to enough food. And, you know, it's still happening in this world and in this country with people who don't have enough access to food and who are struggling. So it's happening now, but evolutionarily, it would happen when, you know, the crops didn't do well that year or during wartime. And we are wired to survive. And the way that our bodies do that is it has us hyper focus on food. So it literally, if our body senses that we do not have enough access to food, and we can induce that with actual physical restriction, like a diet, physically restricting your food, and or just the mental restriction, especially if you've been on lots of physical diets, the mental restriction of, ooh, I shouldn't eat that. That alone, and it's this crazy thing, but this is the thing that actually was the game changer for me in understanding why I was so nuts around food. That alone can actually wire your body to go into that hypervigilant, food obsessed state where your hunger hormones are raised, which makes you hungrier. You are more hyperfixated on food. You think about food all the time. Food tastes better to you, and your metabolism is lowered, which has you put on weight, which is what happens to everyone, not everyone, but most people who go on a diet, lose weight, obsess with food, binge, gain back the weight that they lost in what feels like a day, and often more weight than they lost.
Often more,
and we think, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I'm a terrible, horrible, irresponsible food addict. And look how gross and unhealthy I am now, not realizing that your body is wired to do that on purpose. And the goal is to save your life and to prevent you from dying of the next. Literally, it's like, oh God, we're in famine time. Okay, well, let's like put on, put on weight, have stuff to like get us through the next one. Like it's very, very practical, but we live in this culture that demonizes weight gain. And we have all of these misconceptions about weight and health and how we think that they're exactly the same thing. And it's just incorrect, but it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because the more we yo-yo with our weight, the worse our health becomes, because that's actually really bad for us, you know?
Yes. And I would like you to like get up on the rooftops and like, please scream that because, because I think so many people don't realize, and I didn't have this message for years, that like, you're actually fucking up your body. Like you're hurting your metabolism. And you write in the book about how you're actually raising your set point weight the more you diet. And then not to get on too much of a tangent, but I just want to talk briefly. You talk about something that many diet books talk about, but the Minnesota starvation experiment, which just for people who don't know was an experiment, I think post World War II.
It was during World War II because they were trying to see
soldiers.
how they could rehabilitate. Like they were like prepping for like, oh my God, there are all these like starving countries in Europe right now. Like how can we rehabilitate them?
Yes, so it was this experiment where the men participating were given 1,600 calories a day. And I don't normally like to talk about calories, but I'm calling that out because the number of diets that I have seen calling for 600, 1,400, 1,200, when that is like a starvation level diet. So I want to call that out, first of all. But then some of the effects from this study that you talk about in your book and that I've read elsewhere are just bananas about how these men became obsessed with food, like reading cooking journals. Like they got like, they had access to gum. They were chewing like 40 packs of gum a day and like 15 cups of coffee. And one individual, and I know this is an outlier, but I think symbolically it's so important. Like one person like went off the rails, went into town, like drank a bunch of milkshakes or whatever, like totally went off the diet. And when they were confronted, they like cried and like became violent and they were like kicked off the study and had to go eventually to like a psychological, to be hospitalized for their psychological health. And then the thing that brought them back into perfect mental health was to eat. Mm-hmm. So I think that like, first of all, it just, we associate these behaviors often with women. So like so many things there that like 1,600 calories a day is like total bullshit. That is starvation. Second of all, these ideas that women get like hysterical when they diet or whatever, that's like not at all gendered. That's totally, that's just a byproduct of deprivation, the level of obsession. And like, I know that on some of my like deeper diets, like I was like unhinged. I was miserable. I was like, couldn't think squarely.
Yeah. And then you blame it on yourself. You're like, what's wrong with me? Maybe if I stick to my diet perfectly, this will go away and I'll be happy and wonderful forever, you know?
Not happening. So anyway, I love that you call that out in the book and just like, so many tidbits of information that I just wish that I'd had a younger version of me had access to.
Believe me, I know. But the Minnesota starvation experiment, what they go through physically, but mostly emotionally, it mirrors what happens on a diet. Like I'll never forget being like, that explains everything. It explains so much.
Yeah, totally. Okay. And I'm sure there are some people who are watching who can see why this is deeply problematic, you know, starvation and like the effects of extreme dieting. But so many people, I know I thought this, like, especially like with around paleo, keto, some of the more healing oriented diets. I thought, well, that's extreme dieting and eating disorders. This is a lifestyle for my health. So like, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you say to people?
Well, I think first of all, one of the things that I experienced that a lot of people experience when I wasn't in a caloric restriction, if it wasn't a caloric restriction, it was what some people call orthorexic and orthorexia, which is an obsession with the purity of your food. And purity will mean different things to different people based on what they believe is pure and good. So like the vegan diet's different from the paleo diet. Those both can be orthorexic and there are different rules, but it's the same mental state that you're in.
Don't even get me started on clean eating. Like I lose my mind when people start to talk about clean
eating. I know. Well, it's because people don't realize that alone, you know, that is because the other thing is people will, and I thought this too. I was like, well, I'm not under eating. I'm paleo. I eat all of this protein and all of this fat. And, you know, I put coconut oil in my coffee. Like I was like, I'm not under eating, not realizing that I'd been on a million diets before that. So now that I'm restricting carbs, there's the mental part of my, like, we think that the mind and the body are separate and that they don't affect each other, but they absolutely 1,000,000% do. So not only does your body affect your mind, like when you're not eating enough food, like we were just talking about, you know, it affects your mental health and your mental state, but the things that you think also affect your body. I mean, you can see it in the placebo effect. And there was also another study in the book that I talked about, that milkshake study, where what people thought they were drinking, like they thought they were drinking a regular milkshake. Some were actually drinking this diet drink and some were drinking this like really, really, really hot, like extra high calorie milkshake, but they didn't know. And their body actually responded accordingly. Their body responded to what they thought they were eating.
Yes, which is absolutely bananas. And like, yeah, let's just talk about that for a minute. Like the idea that you think you're having a high calorie milkshake, so your body physically produces less ghrelin, like the hunger hormone, is just like, that is so powerful. And like, what repercussions does it have through just general diet culture?
Exactly. And, you know, the thing that I like to point out is what it means is we don't actually have to not eat enough food for our body to respond as if we are either not eating enough food or about to not eat enough food, especially if we've been on diet after diet after diet. It's almost like a trauma response crisis. Like we've done this before, like gotta like pack it in, you know, and that's why there is this diet yo-yo. People blame it on themselves. It's my horrible willpower. What's wrong with me? I'm a food addict. Before most people, if not all, but most people in this cycle, it is just the way, it's just biology. The binge is absolutely the response to the restriction, but we don't understand how connected it is. We think that they're these separate things.
Totally. And I just want to remind people that if you have any questions as we're talking, if any questions are coming up for you, drop those into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And just kind of a corollary to what we've been talking about is, so we've got all this messed up thinking, all these messages about like how we should be eating, what we should be doing, how to heal ourselves through diet or whatever. And a big part of that, which you call out in the book also, is this like billion-dollar diet industrial complex, which many people have often heard those numbers, like, or like I've heard like a $72 billion wellness industry or whatever. So big business, right? That sells us this notion that we're flawed so they can sell us the cure, which doesn't, I mean, what a perfect business model. Like diets don't work. You blame yourself. You don't blame the diet industry. So then you like give it time, you recover, you gain the weight back. Like the way the physiology meshes up with the diet industry, it's just like a perfect cash cow. And you're like, okay, this wasn't the right diet. Let me try another diet. But you point out something that I hadn't thought about before, which was that these companies, these weight loss companies, have a lot of power at the policy making level and fund a lot of studies used by doctors, which is so deeply messed up.
It's so messed up. I mean, it's all the same, like lobbying, you know. This is research that I actually did for the book. I didn't really understand this when I was going through my own. I kind of like generally knew, oh, it's corrupt. Oh, you know, they're taking advantage of us. But I didn't realize that even just the obesity epidemic was literally created by lobbyists in the 80s and 90s. And it was it was Weight Watchers, it was a couple pharmaceutical companies that had weight loss drugs, Weight Watchers, Slim Fast, a couple big businesses literally lobbied to change the BMI cutoffs, to say that obesity was a national crisis, so they would make money, and it worked. I mean, and that's what we know all of these industries do. We know that the tobacco industry did that. We know that we live in this corrupt country and society, and that, you know, lobbyists are buying off all of these things. But to realize that so much of our cultural obsession with weight, and it existed before that, like, it's not like it wasn't already there. It was already this like purity based thing that came from the Puritans. Like, you know, it's been around, but it really got amped up, and it became this like thing that people talked about in schools. And, you know, the shaming of people's bodies really took, like, it really,
what was it? The president's physical fitness. That was like the
oh yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
Like,
it was like, be thinner for the nation.
Fat, like how traumatic.
Yeah. Seriously. The other crazy thing is
frozen a little.
Yeah. Yeah. Am I
for
back?
me, you're
I know you're freezing on me. I bet I'm freezing on you.
Okay, I think my internet connection is back. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, I can hear and see you. I think that one was
Yeah.
my internet. And just briefly, and then I want to move on to another topic, but you mentioned BMI. So could you just talk, anytime the topic of BMI comes up, I love to deconstruct it, because people think that is like a legitimate scientific concept.
I know.
It's not. So let's talk about
that. BMI was created by a mathematician, like a statistician. I don't think that's the right word, but in the 1800s, based on the heights and weights of men, white men. And he literally just made a graph. Oh, this BMI is this height and this weight. And, he made the graph, and it was never meant to be used as a diagnostic tool at all. It was not meant to even correlate to health. It was just sort of like a way of categorizing different heights and weights and giving them a number. And somehow some doctors started using it to kind of like diagnose, like, oh, your weight's on the higher end, your weight's on the lower end. This is where the middle is. This is normal. But it was never ever meant to diagnose health or like a health condition, but somehow it became that. And then more recently, before, the cutoffs were different. Like, to be technically obese, you had to be even higher weight compared to your health. But doctors and insurance companies were annoyed by it being an uneven number. And so if you'll notice, if you look at BMI, it's all in fives. Like the cutoffs are, 25, 30. And so they just changed them. They just were like, oh, well, the cutoff is now here. And now you only have to be this weight to be obese, which, that's a stigma. That's a whole, we could probably talk about that forever too, but it's a stigmatizing term that, again, it means to eat yourself fat, which, to really break down what's going on with weight, that is such an oversimplification of what is happening in people's bodies. It's dehumanizing. It is essentially calling their body like a disease. And it's just not the preferred term of anyone, and especially not fat activists who are like, no, just call us fat. It's just a neutral descriptor. It doesn't mean anything like judgmental or it, well, that's the thing. Fat has come to mean something judgmental, but it shouldn't be. And we should be, coming back to neutralize that term. But where was I with BMI? So when people say, oh, well, obesity has skyrocketed, it's like, well, you also changed the cutoff points.
Move the goalposts.
So many people just became obese overnight because you just they woke up in a different BMI category. So basically, to talk about BMI, we have this assumption that BMI equals health. If you're a high BMI, you're unhealthy. If you're a normal BMI, you're healthy. What's very interesting is, if you look at underweight BMI is actually has a higher mortality rate than both overweight and obese. And basically, I mean, I can't believe I haven't even said this yet, but we are totally misled on what health is. We have this belief that it is correlated exactly with our weight, and that it's absolutely not true. What's way more true is that we have these natural genetic weight set. Some people say weight set point, but that makes it seem like it's this extremely static number. What it's actually more like is a weight set range. It's very, very, very genetic. But it's also influenced by other things like past diet attempts and health, of course, health problems, health struggles, thyroid issues, insulin resistance can also have weight be a symptom. But again, this assumption that, oh, you've caused it by your weight. It's very often and most often not the case. There's usually way more things going on. Weight is a symptom or just a body type that is demonized. And then people think that they have to spend their whole life trying to lose weight which is bad for your health. And there's usually weight cycling then. And so there are all of these other things that play with health and with weight and with inflammation and our metabolism that just no one's talking about. And we're just like told to go on a diet, and we don't realize what the consequences health-wise, metabolically, emotionally, mental health can be.
Yeah, it's such a vicious cycle. And just to double back a little bit to talk about BMI, that like the intermediate step was that it was picked up by insurance companies to use it to give people insurance. And at first it was totally random. Like one insurance company is like, this is our chart and this is our chart. It wasn't even standardized.
Right.
And then somehow that trickled into the medical profession. So this chart that was like just used for statistics, and then for the insurance industry who don't know anything about health really. Like,
they just want to tell you that you have to give them more money every month because of a random chart. Yeah.
And now it's trickled into the medical, it's like entrenched in the medical profession. And now it's like the be all end all of health.
Yeah, it's insane.
And another thing is that it doesn't, like, studies that examine it show that it's not even the numbers, even as they are, not accurate across different ethnicities. Like for Black people, for example, are shown to be much healthier at a higher BMI, and Asian people, it's actually detrimental because they're actually less healthy at a healthy BMI. So it just has anyway, so much bullshit, so many problems.
Never accounting for body diversity. That's a huge problem. Like assuming that everyone needs to fit this mold and that's how everyone's going to be healthiest. It doesn't make sense.
Yes, totally. And I love the emphasis in your book on redefining health. Just this, we throw around this word health like it's objective, like there's some kind of like concrete definition of health.
Right. Like you've reached it. Congratulations.
Yeah. Which there is no like concrete, like universally accepted definition of health. Like who gets to decide what health is? And it's constantly shifting also. Like I remember when eggs were like like evil, and red wine was evil. Oh no, eggs are great and red wine is good for you. It has like polyphenols and what, like it's constantly changing. And in the book, I think you talk about there's like no ultimate diet truth. So I just love like calling that out and using like BMI as an example, or some of these food trends that come and go, oh, they're awful. Oh no, they're great, whatever. Like it's just constantly shifting. I want to respect your time here and make sure we get to a couple more topics. So I would love to talk about, you have a section in the book where you talk about the noble art of rest. And I think with all of this burnout that people are feeling, I would really like to talk about that for a minute. First of all, why does it matter? You talk about this concept of the 10-minute lie down. So like, that's pretty self-explanatory what that is, but why is rest important, and why specifically is it important for healing our relationship with our bodies and our weight and dieting?
So to start off, just from the perspective of dieting and a lot of people's exercise addiction, is part of healing your relationship with food. So we haven't even gotten into it, but what usually happens in the beginning is there's this period of extreme hunger that people are really afraid of, which is why they usually don't actually get to a point where they heal their relationship with food. They're too afraid of that. So there's this period where we have this extreme hunger that needs to be fed so the body can feel safe. And usually there's a lot of exhaustion that goes along with that is also the body just kind of needing to repair. But a lot of us have this stressful relationship with exercise. So taking rest and taking downtime can be really, really healing and important, and very scary for people in the beginning, because exercise and constant activity can be kind of a way to distract or a way to kind of like manage emotions. And of course, exercise is good for you when you're in a rested and fed state. But rest can be really important from an exercise exhaustion perspective in the beginning when you're healing your relationship with food. But even bigger picture, I think that there's this huge, huge parallel between what we believe about our hunger and our appetites and how we can't trust it and it's wrong and bad and we have to micromanage it constantly. And what we believe about exhaustion and laziness and responsibility and constant productivity. And a lot of us are very unsettled, doing nothing or taking downtime or not having some sort of distraction, a TV or phone or podcast, all of those things are great and fine, but there is this kind of thing that I think we're all dealing with, me included. Of course, I have big thoughts about this and I go through phases and then I'm like, damn, I really don't want to spend any time just listening to my own thoughts. We are constantly distracting ourselves because there's actually a lot that can come up when we let ourselves do nothing, when we let ourselves not have distractions. Then all the stuff that we haven't dealt with, all the pain, all the emotions, all of the thoughts, that's when it kind of starts to bubble up. So a lot of this kind of addiction to busyness and productivity, besides just the diet culture part of like, oh, I need to be constantly exercising, is, and a lot of us don't realize this, but we're really just not wanting to have to deal with our stuff.
Yes. I'm so glad that you called that out, because like, I think that that's often a thing, or always a thing, but I think like during this like pandemic time, it's like reaching another level of like, you know, we're on Zoom, or if you're a small business owner, like that has been a nightmare. If you're a parent and you had to homeschool, or you're worried about your kids, there's just so many stresses, like extra stressors. Right?
It's so much.
And just like, yeah. And people, it's just hard. And then we have like distraction, like we've never had, like the whole world is in here, right? Like I could never do anything besides be on scrolling, right?
I know.
And it's so compelling. It's designed to like keep you in it. So it's like this perfect storm of like ways to not feel your feelings.
It really is. And then on top of all of that, there is this other cultural belief that we are not allowed to.
Yes.
That resting is. And so all of those things are coming together and creating massive amounts of anxiety and massive amounts of burnout.
Yes.
Without the tools to understand what's going on and what might help, you know?
Totally. And we were talking before the talk started, and I thanked Caroline for introducing me to the work through her podcast of Dr. Devin Price, who has written an amazing book that I have here somewhere called Laziness Does Not Exist, but it's about busting this laziness lie. And the first talk in this series was on that. So Stesha, I don't know if you're able to drop a link to that first talk. I know the replay is up. So if people are interested in exploring this further, Devin's book is fantastic. And you can check out the talk in this series. And since we're talking about books and about rest, I would love to talk about tell us a little bit about your book that is dropping in February, your new book.
Yes. So my second book is called Tired as Fuck. I think this is backwards here. So what I realized 5 years into the Fuck It diet, so I have essentially been on the Fuck It diet for 10 years now. So it was 10 years of extreme dieting, 10 years of extreme not dieting. And 5 years in, after the Fuck It diet changed my life, I was no longer obsessed with food. I was eating normally. I was not worrying about anything. I was just living my life. And it really improved things. It improved my sleep. It improved so much, my quality of life. But I still realized about 5 years in that I still had all of these beliefs and, you know, shoulds, I call them, about everything else in my life, personal life, career, you know, this productivity thing. I had started this online business and I was like working at all hours, like trying to make it happen. I was so burnt out. I was like truly burnt out on a level that didn't actually seem logical. Like it seemed like I was tired than I should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized it was like what I was doing at the time, but it was also from the 15 years before that, and maybe even longer, that I had never processed so many emotions, so much trauma, honestly. And I just hadn't unpacked any of that. And it was, and I'd been kind of like under this, that so many of us feel this, like, I need to constantly be improving. I need to constantly be finding a new, you know, once it wasn't diets anymore, it was like, okay, well, what's my job going to be? What new self-help book am I going to do that's going to like make me this perfect, amazing person? And it was just like constant subconscious, like a total subconscious, like hum in the back of my head that I was never doing enough and should always be doing something else. And it hit me like, and it really was because of the Fuck It diet. I was like, I'm doing this in a million other ways, and I'm still driving myself crazy in all of these other ways. What would happen if I stopped? Like, what would happen if I radically tried to do the bare minimum for a long time? what would that look like? And I called it my 2 years of rest. I was still working. I still had to do things, but it was this, what if I approached my life from this place of, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to say yes to that. I'm going to like carve out space to just heal, and not heal in this like rabid, self-help book way, but like just be,
Yeah.
And so that's what the book is about. It's about the exhaustion, and it's about the healing of the exhaustion, mine and culturally.
Yes, I'm so excited to read this. And I think that this has been one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is people are really understanding in it.
Yes.
It's hitting like just very differently. Both, I think it's this combined understanding of like, life is precious. Like really, like we have a limited amount of time on this earth. Like, what are we doing with this time? And then also that combined with the extreme burnout of like people being understaffed, people having all these extra pressures and stresses to deal with. People are really, I think, shifting the way they view like how they want to show up in the world, and like, why am I on this treadmill? And like, why have I been like wholesale like swallowing these myths about like productivity, and like my productivity is my worth? And so I think it's really exciting on one level to see people like examining these concepts, deconstructing the idea that our worth is based on our productivity, really valorizing rest, which something in America that I just have never seen that my entire life. So I love that. I'm very excited to read the book. When does it come out? February
8th.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, everybody, you should buy this book. You should buy that book. Caroline's work is fantastic. Quickly, before we get to questions, and I saw some people had questions in the chat. If you can drop your questions into the Q&A box, that will be a little bit easier for me to come back to them. But I had so many questions. I knew I wasn't going to get to all of them though. But yeah, we have a few more minutes. So I really like how the book is divided into kind of like 3 spaces of like, you spend a lot of time talking about the physical effects of diet, like kind of the physiology of dieting, which we talked about a little bit, and the physical healing of dieting, the emotional healing of dieting, which I think is a lot about what you've just been speaking about, which this primarily like feeling our feelings and not using food or so many other, or food or just diet obsession, honestly.
Yeah, that's the big myth. The big myth is like, oh, we're all emotional eating, so we have to feel our emotions so we don't eat, but not realizing that we also use dieting to not have to feel our emotions. And that's like a big, oh darn, I think you froze, or maybe I froze.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, totally. That like, so actually, talk about, which is a little bit about emotional eating. So we have this notion that like, yeah, like you said, that we're all emotional eaters, or even that emotional eating is bad. And it was from, I first heard this from Natasha Ngindi, who on Instagram, she's the Thick Nutritionist. And she was on our podcast. She was on your podcast. She's amazing. People should check her out if you don't know her. But she was the one who exposed me to the idea of like, no, like you can emotional eat. Like sometimes like we use different things to cope with our emotions. Sometimes we meditate and journal and like get in touch. Sometimes we rest. Sometimes we watch Netflix. Sometimes we eat. Like just have a broad tool chest, and that like we don't need to associate any guilt with that.
Exactly. And the guilt, if you feel guilt around intuitive eating, that is a thing that will often turn it into a binge, or turn it into a future binge, or turn it into like back into the diet culture thing. And the other interesting thing is we are more likely to turn to food as a way to emotionally soothe when we are in a diet relationship with food, because we are higher rewarded. Like it acts like more of a drug in our brains when we're deprived and when we're restricted, or when it's forbidden. So yes, emotional eating is totally fine. And you will find that it's not as much of a problem when you have a normal relationship with food. It's like, okay, I emotionally ate, like, so what? Like moving on, Yeah,
totally. So that was like absolutely blew my mind, and was like this amazing concept for me. But I'm not going to get into it in too much detail, because like you have a great chapter in it in the book, but I do want to read a quote really quickly, if that's okay with you. So when you're writing about numbing to distract ourselves, that when we get used to avoiding our emotions, the emotions don't just go away. They manifest in our bodies, waiting to be felt and processed, but we still keep trying to avoid feeling them. So we often stop spending time in our bodies altogether. And I thought like, oof, yes, that is so true, that we don't deal with this, then we don't live in our bodies. I think just in general, we have so many societal currents and trends keeping us from like listening to our bodies. We're constantly told we can't trust ourselves. Like everything from like, and this is such a silly thing, but like having like electric light, like this is, so now we can work at every hour, and electricity
Right.
now in our
Totally.
society, we work every hour of day and night. And like, oh, you can't trust yourself to know what to eat. You got to like have advice on this. You can't know how to exercise. You need a trainer. You need a program. Like so many things, cutting ourselves off from like just being in our body. And I love that you called out that like part of the healing starts when we can learn to just be in our body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's like where our wisdom and intuition is too. So we're so cut off from that when we're like dieting and not wanting to feel.
Yeah. So do you have any advice or like from your own personal experience, like ways like, and I know that it's a process, like obviously like that's going to take a minute for us to learn.
Yeah. The great thing is
advice for people on like how to create that relationship.
Yeah. Well, the great thing is that there are so many ways to begin to be more embodied. Literally, I think of it as like our life force, like needing to come back down. Like that's, I literally think about it in those terms. And one of the ways that we can bring it back down is to actually feel what it feels to be like, okay, can I feel my legs? Like, or am I so disconnected right now? And trauma, and most of us are carrying around some trauma, and some people are carrying around way more trauma, PTSD. But I really do think that because we have such a low literacy of trauma, we don't realize how common it is, and that most of us are not processing stuff because we're not in our bodies. And then being in your bodies is really uncomfortable because that's where the trauma is waiting to be processed. And so we avoid it altogether. I think that's a big piece of the puzzle here. But if we can just actually say like, okay, I have a body, like, can I feel it? Because think about how often we do that. Very, very rarely. And it's usually because we're not in our bodies. But can I feel, my legs on the couch that I'm sitting on or the chair that I'm sitting on? Can I feel my feet? Can I feel my toes? Can I feel my breath going into my torso? So much of mindfulness, before I had this understanding of like coming back down into your body, I was like, okay, so you want me to like feel my body? Like I didn't get it. But now I get that it's like, am I even aware that it's there? And then the breathing thing of like, can I breathe my awareness, my life force into my body and feel it? And a lot of people who have more intense trauma or PTSD can't do that without a lot of help. So that can actually be a barometer of like, do I need like a lot of help to start processing stuff? Do I need to go find a trauma-informed therapist? Or can I just start to come back into my body myself? And it's still going to be uncomfortable for people who haven't, been doing that for a while. But all of our wisdom, intuition, hunger, fullness, happiness, joy, pleasure is in our bodies. And most of us aren't experiencing it.
Yes. And I'm so glad that you kind of like highlighted specifically that being in your body is so accessible to, like even 3 deep breaths can have such an impact.
Yeah.
But just like when you learn to kind of use breath as a tool, I think it's really powerful, but really accessible, free. You can be long, like you can meditate for an hour, or you can do 3 deep belly breaths. Like it just has so much power to bring us back into our bodies.
Yeah.
And then, okay, before we go to questions from people in the audience, I want to ask one last question of you, Caroline, to bring it back to activism. One of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this work, well, both because it is like saved my life. Like since I have stopped dieting, my life is, I cannot explain how much better my life is, how much more energy I have for things, but mostly like how much love I have for myself now. And like, in my 40s. It's been a process, but there were times in my 20s, like where I was just consumed with like self-hatred, like just hated my body. Like I thought it was so disgusting and like just took literally like all my energy. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this work is I know what it can feel like to like move from that place to this place. And then the other reason is that I think, especially for women, we spend so much time obsessing about our image, our bodies, how we're perceived, what we look like, beauty, diets, that it takes away so much of our power. And moving out of that space, like really gives us energy and time back. So I'd love to hear from you, like what one or two, or like what kind of, do you feel like once you've stepped off of this toxic diet treadmill, what positive things have you been able to give your energy to in a new way?
Oh, it's such a good and such an important question. Well, the first thing is yes, I'm so much happier. I'm so much more present, like genuinely present in my life, with the people in my life. But I also never would have written anything that I wrote about diet culture, about anything. Like, I feel like creativity was the gift that I got with the space, the mental space, the time that I got. I was able to think like, okay, so what am I passionate about? What do I want to be doing? What do I want to be doing with my time? What do I care about? What's important to me? Because I wasn't thinking about any of that when I was obsessed every moment of, am I being good on my diet? Nothing. And so it literally opened up the world to me of like, okay, well, what do I want to do for joy? And what do I care about doing and talking about and sharing? And I just know that I wouldn't have been able to do any of that if I was still dieting. I just know it. And the other thing that, I know is the amount of, think about all the money, like honestly, all the money on pointless stuff that is just marketed to me to make me feel bad about myself, to make me think I need this thing to like do something to my skin or whatever weird exercise thing that I would have bought, whatever diet, whatever I was buying. I spent so much money on diet culture and self-improvement and like self-hatred essentially. And those are industries that are, they're profiting off of our self-hatred. And that is not something that we have to do. If we want to, buy whatever thing to feel good, it should be about, it should be about feeling good and not because we feel bad and feel like we have to do this thing. One of the things that I wrote in Tired as Fuck, I remember, it was like, it's totally fine to want to try on a new lipstick and want to like, do your hair. But what are the things that we think we have to do? What are the things that we haven't even questioned that we are doing because we think we have to, but we don't enjoy it, and we don't have to. We just think we do because it's gone totally unexamined. And that is what, that's what I think is really cool about kind of stepping out of it. It's like, okay, so what do I care about, and what is important to me, and what do I enjoy?
Yes, I love that, getting your agency back, having like a real connection to like what actually brings you joy, what really makes you feel good, and not just what you're told should make you feel good. Yes, yeah. I love it. Okay, let's go quickly. We have a couple questions here. Let's see if I can pronounce this. Abdulaziz Aladwan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Why is advocating self-acceptance so important to you?
Well, the alternative is misery. The alternative is being on this treadmill, metaphorically and literally, where you're torturing yourself in order to reach some kind of abstract goal that people are profiting off of, that you are literally wasting time, money, years off of your life just in a state of thinking that you are not good enough. And it robs us of years. it robs us of years and joy and money, and it robs us of our lives. I think we could go through our entire lives, and many people do, hating yourself and dieting yourself into submission just so you can like fit in some little box that you feel like you have to fit into. But we are lucky in some ways that to live in this time. You know, it's been a horrible 2 years, but we're lucky that there is more freedom to say, you know what, I don't have to do that thing that maybe 50 years ago we really would have been kind of like ostracized from our communities, for, not doing what everyone else did. But we have the opportunity to say, you know what, this is my one chance, and I'm not going to spend it hating myself and forcing myself to do exercise that I despise,
Yes, totally. It's so important. And just like when you're talking 50 years ago, I'm like, when I was in college in the 90s, just like Kate Moss and like heroin, like so sometimes I am jealous of Gen Zers. I see some Gen Zers, especially on like TikTok and Instagram. And I'm like, damn, like these like young people, like they're like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not bringing myself to the doctor's office. This is bullshit. And I'm like, part of me is like, yes,
I know.
And part of me is like, oh, I'm so jealous.
I know.
Okay, last question from Jesse Perez. How did you start your journey of redefining health and not get worried that you'd fall back into toxic behaviors? I feel as though I'm stuck in limbo because I don't want to fall back into old habits, but I do want to nourish my body differently, i.e. regular exercise, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the beginning, I was kind of like, my life was like researching it. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really have anyone guiding me. I was like, my epiphany was I need to gain weight. I need to be okay with gaining weight because that is my problem. That is the reason I'm obsessed, because I'm obsessed with weight. That's why I'm obsessed with food. So that was an epiphany that I had. And I started researching to see how I could do that. So I started reading fat activist books, which led me to Health at Every Size, which is about the science behind it. So I was like reading, like soaking it all in. All became the Fuck It Diet. So you can read the Fuck It Diet, and you can also read the other things that I reference in there too. But that was a really helpful way to like keep me focused. And then the fear. So it sounds like you're saying you're afraid to fall back into unhealthy behaviors by trying to, like you referenced exercise, I think. So
yeah.
So it sounds like you're saying like you're afraid if you start exercising again, that you'll fall back. And that may happen, and that can happen. But what I always say is, first of all, it's not necessarily going to be a linear process. There's a lot that you're going to have to feel out and figure out on your own. And if you can just be honest with yourself, continually check in with yourself and ask yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I doing what I'm doing because it really does feel good to go for that run? Or am I doing that because I'm afraid that I have to be doing it? And it's sort of this way of managing my anxiety about my health and my mortality and my looks. And if you can, because this is a thing that people really ask often about exercise specifically, because exercise is so good for us, and it can be so joyful if we're doing things we enjoy and we are well fed and we are well rested, and we've kind of gone through a period of rest if that's what we need at the beginning. So really all we can do is check in with ourselves and make sure that we are doing things that we enjoy and aren't forcing ourselves to. And it's just that constant like honesty with yourself that can be difficult. But if you can kind of get into a habit of just checking in, knowing you don't have to do it perfectly, you can, exercise in a way that is not great or healthy for your mental health for a week and realize you're doing it, and then check in and say, oh, okay, that's human. Like, we don't have to do this perfectly. We're not going to do it perfectly. So it's okay to like kind of figure it out as you go.
Yes, self-compassion, always so important. And then just a reminder, so for anybody obviously who's looking for resources, great place to start. There's so much in here, like practical, way more than we had time to get into tonight, but about the science, about the physiology, about some ideas, exercises for changing the way you think, changing your core beliefs. So thank you so much. It was such an honor to speak with you. I'm so excited. I can't wait for your new book to come out. Thank you, everyone who was on the call. And Stesha, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Oh, no. I almost forgot. I forgot to ask you, where can people find you? Hype yourself up. Tell us all the things. Podcast,
okay. Well, I spend way too much time on Instagram, so you can follow me at The Fuck It Diet. And you can learn lots of stuff about the Fuck It Diet by going to thefuckitdiet.com. I highly recommend you go to thefuckitdiet.com/book and sign up to read the first chapter and go from there and see if you like it, because it'll definitely give you a sense of what it's all about.
And then also, don't you have some like bonuses and freebies for people who pre-order your new book?
Oh, yes, I do. So if you go to thefuckitdiet.com/tired, you can read the beginning of my second book. And I have lots and lots and lots of bonuses for the people who pre-order and screenshot their proof of purchase and send it in. I have all the instructions on there if you go to thefuckitdiet.com/tired and sign up for the first chapter. But yeah, lots and lots, including like commentary on the Fuck It Diet.
So I felt like, I felt like I'm getting like all these little treats.
Oh, yay.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much. This has been such a great conversation and such an important conversation. And I also loved Caroline's book and can highly recommend reading it. It changed my outlook on a lot of things. So thank you so much for writing it. And Alaya, thank you for introducing me to it.
Of course.
Yeah. So we have one more amazing event scheduled in Olaya's series. The final event will be on Thursday, December 9th, and features Evian Whitney. And they and Olaya will talk about the importance of reconnecting with pleasure and their book, Sensual Self, which sounds to me like a perfect kickoff to the holiday season, frankly. It sounds like perfect. So you can find more information about Olaya's series. And I just realized I put the wrong link in the chat just now. So bear with me. I'm going to pop it in there so folks can learn more about Evian's event. I'll just take 2 seconds here. Okay, cutting and pasting, very exciting. And I also wanted to say that we're interested in hearing from you. So I'm going to pop a link in the chat to a little post-event survey and would appreciate it if folks would take a minute to fill it out after the event. I really do read them all, and it's super helpful in helping us understand what folks are interested in hearing about. So take a minute. I'll actually keep the Zoom open for a minute so people can grab the link after we're done here tonight. So thanks for that. So, and I'm so grateful to you guys. I'm so grateful to everybody who made tonight's program possible. Thank you to our program partners, Third Place Books. And thanks to our sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation. And of course, thanks to everybody who's watching tonight. We're so glad that you spent the evening with us, and we will see you next time. Good night, Caroline. Good night, Olaya.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.